5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Art of Move podcast with myself, Anthony Manuel, my good friend, Dr. William Raybar, out here in the Canadian Rockies, trying to find the grand unified theory of human movement. And we are joined today by our friend, Jordan Taves, a movement coach. I got a little bit of an intro to Jordan. Jordan spent the last decade of his life searching for and creating solutions to patterns of chronic joint pain. Traumatic injuries, poor movement capability, and grappling sports pushed his body to its limit. His own movement exploration was born out of sheer desperation. And at 18, he began studying kinesiology in a college setting where he could hopefully try and put himself back together. After years of trial and error with conventional and non-conventional therapy methods, he eventually gave up on kinesiology and dove headfirst into weightlifting. Since feeling good was no longer an option, he decided that he would become an aesthetic deity with pecs and arms like Thor. Constant weight training only resulted in more damage and pain, but thankfully, YouTube turned him on into the realm of functional training, and his curiosity peaked. To his surprise, it only took a few months to undo 6 years of chronic pain. He never ended up needing a degree or a single surgery to get there. Once his pain was gone, he knew that there would be others who were desperate for the same answers that he managed to find. So he began to fill that niche in whatever way he could. We're really, really excited to talk to you today, Jordan, to talk about your journey, to talk about the chronic pains that you experienced and that you kind of went through. And for those who are listening, and we were just talking right before the show started a bit about your history, but when did you start feeling chronic joint pain, and what do you think caused it?
I'd say like the first true experience I had with chronic joint pain was probably my sophomore year. I had these growing pains. That's what the doctor told me they were. And I don't know how you guys do it up in Canada, but down here in high school, they have the 4 layers of lockers, right? And so the freshmen are at the bottom, the sophomores have the second one up, and then so on and so forth. And I would go down to get to my locker, and then getting up, I couldn't. And so I had to like use other people's open lockers to like climb my way back up. And I remember like walking home from school, and I'd be with my buddy, and one of my knees would just buckle and I'd almost like fall on my face. And that was like the basically the full explanation that I got was that it was just growing pains. And then my junior year, I got tackled into a wall playing sharks and minnows in the wrestling room, and basically snapped my collarbone. And then that dislocated like my scapula. It dislocated a few ribs. It really like I was out for a couple months at that point, and then from there my shoulders were never the same. It really came like crashing down my senior year when I was wrestling. I got caught in something called a crucifix, not the choke, but it's a different move where you're essentially they have one of your arms locked up here, and then they have one of your arms locked between their legs. So I was like this. The guy threw his hips in, and it extended my head forward, and I felt both my shoulders just come out. So that was like the start of my senior wrestling season. That happened, and then pretty much every practice, every tournament, every competition after that, they were just popping out constantly. And I was double jointed, so they just pop right back in. It wasn't like I had to stop wrestling or anything like that. I would just feel it slip, and then I'd feel the pain when it came back in. So that was like that was when things started to get really, really bad for me, for sure.
And at that point, what did you do about it? Was there anything that the medical community did for you, or anything that you did for yourself that would solve that pain or would lessen it?
It was kind of a downward spiral. I went to a doctor, and again, the explanation was just you're double jointed. Actually, they did diagnose it. They said I had MDI. So essentially, that's multi-directional instability, which in my mind is like the equivalent of just saying like your joints don't work, you know? And so, and I was telling Anthony before we got on, I went to a doctor, and he basically, he raised my arm up and he put his hand on top of my shoulder just to kind of like move it around a little bit, I'm thinking. And the second he put the hand on top, his sublux came out, and he just took his hands off. He was like, okay. So I stopped practicing. There were certain points where I couldn't go to school anymore because I was afraid of like running into people and stuff. And then I would just show up to the competitions the duels and the tournaments, and I would wrestle. And there was no like rehab at that point. Like I was just popping ibuprofen in between matches. I remember at one tournament, I was just laying on the mat in between my matches, just like rocking and holding my shoulders. It was like, it was pretty bad. And then I did start seeing a physical therapist towards the end of my season, but they would put me through basic, they'd have me doing like a plank where I'm touching my shoulders and doing things like that. And I could feel my humerus like slipping around inside the joint, no matter what we were doing. So nothing like felt right or like it was really helping anything. And at the end of the session, they would just give me this insane tape job, like from my pec all the way back to my shoulder blade. It'd cover my whole upper arm. And then eventually it was both shoulders. So I was just covered in tape going into my matches.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's amazing in high school how you can be that injured and just go and do a tournament, right? So I don't think like once adults get to that level, it's over, right? You know not to do it. But in high school, for some reason, I was the same way, always injured and just keep going, keep going. And in fact, I think I'm kind of like you, where I think most of my major injuries happened in high school. And the fact that I could keep going on them was very detrimental to not only the joints themselves, but my motor patterns. Because I remember full seasons of limping and just running as fast as I could on that limp. I like now I can't even picture that, right? So there must have been a point, even let's say after high school, where you finally found a solution to what was happening. When was that point that you finally like, okay, I'm on the right track here? Or maybe it was a type of uh system you were doing. What happened when you finally found, something that would help you?
Yeah, what was the turnaround point? I think even because if you were seeing physical therapists, like what was the aha moment for you, and how did your journey towards actually fixing those problems start for you?
I think the first time I truly felt relief, I got a tip to go and see this guy named Chuck Petchin, and he's sort of a local legend in Orange County. He was the first person I'd ever met, and this was 10 years ago. He had designed percussion therapy guns like on his own, and I hadn't seen those anywhere else yet. They were definitely different from what's out there now. They weren't cordless, and they're like these big metal knobs, and then you put a towel on you, and he would just kind of run it over you. But he he essentially put his hands on me, and I think he was touching my spine or something. And this was my first time meeting him. And 20 seconds in, he goes, "You're pretty flexible, huh?" And I was just blown away by the fact that this dude could touch my spine, and he knew that I was hypermobile. So I was like, okay, this guy's definitely got some solutions. I was done wrestling at this point, but so I would go and see him, and the percussion therapy, it would make me feel better for like a couple hours, and then everything would kind of go back to just dysfunction and pain and everything. But I was like, so there's a way to somewhat like relieve some of this. And that was when I he inspired me to pursue kinesiology, because he was from the first graduating class at Long Beach State, and he hyped it up for me. So I just was like, all right, I'll check it out. And I was going to community college at the time, so started taking all the courses and trying to study physical therapy. I wanted to be a physical therapist at first, but 2 years in, that I everything got worse because I was coaching wrestling at this point. So I'd go in and I'd wrestle with the kids, and sometimes we'd play games and I'd wrestle with like two, three kids at once. So I was still having the subluxations, and it was just not smart behavior on my end. I was making things worse, and eventually, like I realized I wasn't going to get what I wanted from physical therapy and from kinesiology. So like my first real breakthrough, I mean, I did find a couple people, like we had spoken before the show. I found Elliot Holsey, Ido Bertal, but doing Nadia Aguilar's 10-week course where he really dives in with the myofascial release and the theracane and the cross balls, that was where I felt like I'm truly like changing my body, and I'm readapting it to something more functional. And that was, he gives you 3 weeks of myofascial release. Maybe the program's changed, I don't know, but I stretched those 3 weeks into like 2 months, and then eventually I think like 3 months total. But I was on the floor for like 3 to 4 hours a day, just rolling out, using the lacrosse ball. no working out whatsoever, no stretching, no nothing. I was just like, this thing is giving me pain relief, and it's actually sticking. Like the adjustments are staying. The I even remember like the exact moment where I was like ready to let go of all conventional methods, because the first release point that I tried was my adductors. Right, my whole life I was knock-kneed. I told you about those growing pains that I had, and then all of a sudden, like I hit my adductors with I think I used a medicine ball, and I stood up, and I had a big mirror in front of me, and my knees were straight, and I just was blown away at that point. So that essentially was like my introduction into the true realm of like functional training. Um, and that was really where all the pain left, and I was free from those chains. They were always holding me back. I mean, I think I said in one of my posts recently, when I was 19 I couldn't throw a football because my shoulder would pop out of its socket. I would go to the beach and I go to run and like dive over a wave, and I would jump too fast and both my shoulders would pop out. And eventually the imbalances in the shoulders, and I think that traumatic, like being hit into a wall, everything was shifting my spine to the right, so eventually my neck was just lighting up on a daily basis. And so now it wasn't just shoulders, it was my spine too. But yeah, that's one thing that I do have to give credit to Nowdy for, is he gave me like he made me flip, so kudos to him on that.
Yeah, what else did you get from the 10-week course? Because I think I've gone through it. Will went through some of it as well. And we're pretty big proponents of myofascial release. A lot of people say that myofascial release doesn't do a lot, or has like a minimal lasting effect, right? Like it's like a temporary uh, change in either neurological or structural adaptation. But like I think both of us have noticed like lasting changes. What else did you get that kind of, was there anything else in that whole course or that whole procedure that stuck with you or created structural changes for you?
Oh, dude, absolutely. Like that was the first time I was introduced to the concept of taking a linear movement and adding a third dimension to it. Because like he takes a row and a press, and he essentially just has you rotate as you do it. And so that like simple concept, that's what I do really well with, is like if I see something super simple, but it makes sense, like I don't need all the information behind it. Like intuitively, I'm like, look at the way his shoulder's moving. Like that looks smooth and fluid. And I have like this janky, blocky movement in my shoulders. So I started doing that, and intuitively your body will tell you too. Like this is what we've been needing. I always tell people, when you add in that third dimension to movement, it's like your body is a wet towel, and you're starting to kind of wring it out, and instead of having all the water be like trapped in one area, it's nice and distributed now, so the movement itself just feels better.
Hmm.
But yeah, that was the main thing, was the three-dimensional movement.
Yeah, it's very interesting. One of my criticisms of Goda is the lack of what I see anyway, myofascial release, and I get the argument of being in the math and being in the correct angles will stop you from having those muscles tighten up in the first place. But some people are already so far in the other direction that like doing a few weeks of only myofascial release may be a good idea. You can add, I mean, obviously it's smart to add movements in afterwards, but most people aren't even at that point yet, right? Where it's like they know that myofascial release will work for them. So yeah, that's interesting that you said that. So basically, when was the point where you found Goda or found more functional movements other than, or functional systems other than FP?
Well, it's funny. Like everything was on Instagram at this point. It was Primal Movements. I don't know if you guys follow him. He's another homie up in Canada. And one, he actually followed me back. Like nobody from FP ever followed me back, so I wasn't getting feedback really. Granted, I should have like hired a trainer if I was really serious about it, but I'm sort of a do-it-yourself kind of guy. So and I saw that he went with the GOTA certifications. So I just messaged him, and I was like, what? How could you possibly choose? Because GOTA still looked funky to me at this point. I was like, I don't know about that. And I was like, why would you choose go to over FP, like, because he actually got certified, and I was looking to just pick one of those certifications, whether it was WEC or NAUTI or whatever. So he just kind of explained his viewpoint behind it, and just saying that it's a more like full system. And not only that, but the community itself, like you guys have said it multiple times in your podcast, the coaches are really responsive and open-minded, and just cool about things in general. And a majority of any go to coach that I've found online, they've followed me back, we've interacted, and we post each other's stuff. So it's just like such a different community, you know. And I'm from Southern California. I'm all about the warmth and the love and all that stuff. So I felt a lot more of that with Goda. And then I actually had a breakthrough moment. One of my buddies that I was exploring all this stuff with, and he was getting into it as well. His name's Timmy. He he owns a CrossFit gym in San Clemente, so we were just kind of messing around with stuff, and I had somebody doing ball slams, kind of like that, how FP will do, like almost like a deadlift with it, but it was a lighter ball, so I'd have him slam it down after. And I recorded my buddy doing it, and his feet were like linear straight, and when his hips came down and his spine came down, everything like wobbled. And then all I did was I told him to just turn his feet in. I didn't say like second toe straight or anything like that. I was like, just go pigeon toed. I want to see how this works. And the second he did that, he did another ball slam. Hips and spine went straight down. There was no like lateral shifts. There was nothing. And I was like, damn, that just organized his whole structure with one single cue. So at that point, I was like, I told Timmy, I was like, we gotta look into this. We gotta explore it. And he still kind of is more in the realm of functional patterns, but I just went full Goda, and I think within a couple months I was signing up for the coaching certification.
So I want to rewind a little bit back to you talked about taking 3 months almost to focus exclusively on myofascial release. And for people who are listening who don't exactly know what that can do, first I want to talk about like how you notice it affecting your structure over time. You talked about that one example of releasing your adductors and seeing your knees straighten out, but in terms of the stability that you felt in your system and the alignment that you felt in your system, where did you go from after you invested that 3 months, and how did you find that 3 months of just myofascial release impacted your whole system?
Well, it's like you were saying earlier, like Goda, they're not huge promoters of it, and it's I get it. It's two different approaches. Goda is saying earn it, don't force it. Like you're putting your body within the math, and then you're giving the proper amount of time for gravity to sort of like wiggle your body back into place. Um, and with functional patterns, it's kind of like you're just taking a bunch of shortcuts, and you're kind of starting to create tension and force certain things to happen. And it is kind of the same concept with myofascial release if you approach it that way. But what I realized was I didn't know any of this stuff back then, so I was just going through it, and all of a sudden, like my body was relaxing. You guys have talked about in the show before, where like relaxing a muscle should be considered just as much of a skill as contracting a muscle, and that was what I experienced. And it was the feedback from the myofascial release. That's what all this stuff is to me. It's just different feedbacks. And I think that there's a few Goto coaches out there who are massage therapists as well, and they're really interesting. Like Nashville Goto, I forgot his name, but um, essentially, like I think you can get the best of both worlds. Like I really did feel my structure changing in a way where like it was safe. Like I feel like there you can always overcompensate, you can always mess up a certain movement, but with release, you're generally like the context of it is very controlled, and all you're doing is just trying to relax. You're not trying to reprogram, create tension, shift pressure, anything like that. Well, actually, you kind of are trying to shift pressure, but it's something that you can give to someone who knows nothing about this, and they can make progress with their body. And that's what was the kicker for me. And that's when if I'm going to design online programs, like they are going to include a certain level of myofascial release, because if I'm not there coaching the person, I know the movements aren't going to be that great for a while. But I do know that myofascial release, the technique there is going to be pretty simple. They're going to be able to figure it out. And past a certain point, they'll be able to kind of explore and do things on their own. And that's my whole goal, is to make my clients self-sustainable. So it's like, I let them know, hey, this isn't the cure-all. This is teaching your body access. It's not teaching it control just yet. It's really just giving you access to new parts of your body, because if a muscle is tight, I'm not going to be able to get all those fibers to fire. So then just default to myofascial release in those moments, and you'll be able to figure out solutions pretty easily.
Yeah, that's really interesting with what you're saying here. You being hypermobile, and I've noticed this from seeing, 1,000 patients and seeing different spectrums of people's tissue, is hypermobile people have different sets of issues. You have to reconnect areas. So that's where FP comes in really well, and connecting tensions. However, I find that a lot of hypermobile people, yoga people, have muscles that are more tense closer to the spine, closer to the midline. And then the outer muscles are more loose. Okay. So it's like a different type of myofascial release that you need for someone who's loose versus someone who's tight. For someone who's loose on your end, I would relax the muscles by doing myofascial release, and then I would immediately reconnect the tensions that in the area you just released, right? On the other end of the spectrum, for me, I was really tight. So I actually had to get in there and just let the muscles relax. Something you reminded me of is those adductors. In skiing, I was putting all my pressure on the adductors, and that's how I held myself as I went down the hill or through seasons. I couldn't even spread my legs past, I couldn't even go wide in my columns because my adductors wouldn't even allow me to get there. It was that bad. And then I can think now, it's like, of course, the pressure is going to pull my hip in and I'm going to have some issues. So for you, what was the myofascial release that you found best? Or even right now, what is your go-to that you do on a daily basis, or one that you found that was like, that is really it? That was one that was the one that helped me out. And I'm talking technique.
It changes for me. My body changes on a day to day. Like what you were saying about the tension points being closer to the spine, like that is, if I'm talking to somebody who's hypermobile, that's what I tell them. I try to let them know that, like, you're not hypermobile everywhere. You have the appearance of hypermobility because your tension is more concentrated. It's closer to the central nervous system. So although you can forward fold all day, you can get depth in certain areas, if we just find that specific movement or that specific MFR technique, you're going to find that like the pain levels that you experience are so much higher than somebody who has that tension evenly distributed throughout their body. Like, let's say that if they're getting an 8 out of 10 all down the quads, the TF or the TFL, and like your QL, whatever else, for us it's going to be an absolute 10 once we hit those spots close to the spine. And I've experienced that. I've almost puked from scraping, so like and that's different with everybody, but generally that's kind of what I see, is that once we figure out how to show people that they're not hypermobility in every sense. Like usually it's going back that kills people, or trying to find the back chain, because everything's forward for them, especially with like the yogis and folks like that. Like they're so used to just allowing their body to collapse that when you try to get them inside ankle bone high or in a back chain dominant position and then get them to move around, that's when you see it. So like my favorite technique, honestly, it's really been the arms and chest for me, because I work like 60, sometimes 70-hour work weeks, and I'm carrying weights all the time, and sometimes I'll be doing manual not adjusting people, but like making sure that they're having the right pivots and things like that. So I'm using my hands like all day. And unfortunately, like my hands, arms, shoulders were where all the issues were in the first place. So if like my goal over time is to teach my shoulders to be in more of a loading pattern, not get stuck in a release pattern all the time. It kind of sucks working up here all day because that is more of a release pattern. So it's been an issue, but what I'll do now is I mean I do a little bit of myofascial release here and there. But I go and get massages a good amount, and I just tell them, I'm like, dude, just work on my hands, kill my forearms, like beat up my chest, and I'm good. You don't even need to touch my lower body. My back feels great. It's just the tension, the palmar fascia, and that sort of thing. Like that's gonna be like my everything else feels pretty good at this point. You know, I have no pain. Like my hands don't actually like hurt. They just feel wrong. You know, it's like once you've kind of entered that place of like knowing when movement is wrong or right and when it feels wrong or right, like every time it's wrong, it's frustrating. It's like nagging you. So that's been my thing is and for my clients, honestly, it's the calves and using there's this guy, he had a his name was like Eric Pook or something like that. And I liked him. He had like a kind of an irritating voice, but he would do these techniques where like he said, if you have tight calves, take your top knee, drop it down on that back knee, and then just give pressure there. And that was a big one for me. And then eventually I took that concept and I started going here with it down by the soleus and just sitting and using that shin bone to dig in. Because my high arches are the thing that kind of mess me up the most when it comes to back chain dominance and inside ankle bone high. Like my soleus is really tight, and that technique, you don't need any equipment for it. You could be sitting and watching TV. You could be working and still like doing all this stuff at the same time. So that was probably the biggest point for me.
When you're doing myofascial release, do you find you pin a spot down and kind of relax into it for a little while? Do you apply movement and kind of massage it more? What's your go-to? What do you find works best for you?
I always start with just strict pressure, um, because I think when I'm doing this stuff, my mind moves fast, and I want to like move through things quickly. And so that's like me not only telling like my mind to slow down and let everything adjust, but then it's also just giving my body time to absorb the feedback. And to be honest, like you get to a point where like you almost don't need the feedback of the foam roll. You can just target an area and slowly get it to just let go. It's like if I'm trying to do like little muscle tests to see if somebody's tight, I'll pick up their arm and then I'll grab on their trap and then I'll say, okay, let go of your arm, because they had no idea that they're the ones holding their arm up. I'm not even doing it. So it's like I just assume in certain areas that I'm always holding on. I'm always tight. And if I can just consciously cue it to relax, a lot of the times I don't even need the foam roll anymore. Like it goes. And that, like when you said like relaxing is a muscle group can be a skill, like that couldn't be more true. Like I can stand outside shirtless and feel the wind like hit my pec and be like, oh, my pec's tight. You know, it's super weird. But at the same time, when you have that level of awareness with your body, it's like everything is feedback, no matter what. So, yeah, I forgot what the question even was.
That's so good.
It's very interesting. A lot of the go-to coaches we talk to, and I think almost every single one mentions feel over and over and over again. It's like, how do you quantify that? You can't really do it. You can ask somebody on a 1 to 10, what do you feel here? But that's pretty much it. But that's such an art. There's so much to it, the internal feel of something. And I think that's maybe why, on the scientific end, it's kind of hard to bridge something like GOTA where you're in feel, or myofascial release. It's
that was the
majority
one
feeling.
That was the one issue that I ran into when I went out to New Orleans and did my lab weekend, was that the sensations for me were off. Everybody else was feeling what they were supposed to, and I was like, this can't be right. I'm hurting. And that is my goal moving forward, is to dial down on what should the sensation of go to be, what should the feeling be, and diving deep into that, because everybody's going to absorb what you teach differently. So like the book that I'm writing, it's basically just teaching people the sensation of like awareness in the body, and learning to just create it at first, start being aware, but then like getting through the different levels of it to the point where, like for me, I used to work out in front of the mirror all the time. And so eventually, like the front side of my body looked really good. And then I started recording videos, and I'd see my body from the back. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, why do my shoulder blades look like that? Or like, why is my ass like under me? Like, why am I like tail tucking? And so like this is like Ricky always talks about, Coach Ricky always talks about the see versus the feel. And the see is where you make up for the lack of feel. And also it's like how you sync everything up. Because my feeling as a hypermobile person, I'll feel like I just moved an inch, but then I'll look at the video and I moved like 6 inches. I'm like, whoa, I'm way outside my column now. So instead of opening up and getting access, I'm similar to Bam, where I had to learn to limit things and shut things down. And that was actually when I was struggling with that whole sensation concept and like what I should be feeling like I don't think my right QL should be like absolutely on fire, and then my left one's just a little bit tense, um, during those back chain workouts. So when I was talking to Bam, he put things in a different light, and he addressed things in a way that made more sense to me. So I'm like, how do I dumb it down even further? Because I've been in this field now for a few years. How do I dumb it down to the point where like somebody who's never set foot in a gym can talk to me or read my book and completely understand what I'm getting at from a sensory perspective,
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that book that you're writing. Is it specifically on myofascial release and feel, or is it more just in general how to feel? Could you unpack it for us a
It's
little bit?
it's actually, so the book is called Move Fun, and that's just short for movement fundamentals. And I try to break movement itself down into the most simple terms possible, which is there's two main concepts. It's pressure and positioning. And that's everything. Like that's digestion, that's breathing, that's like, so if my if my movement is painful, for example, then I can find the issue somewhere within positioning or somewhere within pressure. Positioning is the more visual and the easier to understand, and it's also what I teach first because it's what people retain more. Like you use words like posture and people go, oh, and like they'll visually, like they'll actually like straighten up. And so then you give them the go to map, and you just sort of start push you introduce the feelings that they should be going through depending on if they're the stiff body type or the hypermobile. And you say, okay, so like if your position's good because you've recorded video and you've checked it and you look good, then something's off with your pressure. You need to start shifting the pressure around in your body. And that's literally, it's like two main chapters, and then like the second, so there's like maybe 5 chapters total. Second chapter is just saying like gravity, life is a constant battle with gravity. And the more efficiently that you fight that fight, like the longer that your body is going to last, the more durable and injury proof you'll be. And then the last chapter is just kind of like methodology, like creating the awareness and learning. This is something that I think is really important for people, which is you need to let go of bad habits before you start trying to implement a bunch of good habits, because that's where people fall into overcompensation. It's like folks who go a little too far into pigeon toe stance and then their feet start to hurt. It's like, well, I mean, you got to give your bones and your tissues like time to adjust. So maybe if you're completely duck footed, maybe just start by getting straight. And if that's comfortable for you, like work your way in. Don't just go full pigeon toed and start squatting and doing all this stuff because you're gonna hurt yourself. So let go of the bad habits first, and then slowly start to bring in those better habits. That way, people don't get ahead of themselves. It's like that might not even be the best way to describe it, but I think it's going to resonate more with like the people who try really hard on everything they do and they try to just go full gas, it'll kind of get them to like slow things down a little bit and be like, let me listen to my body. Let me check my positioning and my pressure and make sure that like I'm comfortable here. I can actually like maintain this.
So what starting point do you have for people who are trying to create more structural stability and good postures and good behavior patterns? Like for you with your shoulders, you have this issue with your shoulders dislocating. How did you apply these principles to reduce that from happening?
I had to I had to be careful because I kept doing everything wrong, and with Goda, it's like the focus is macro. Um, and for me, like I wanted to dive deep into everything. Like I wanted the micro on everything. So like a big thing for me was like my shoulders just never looked right. And they still look funky in a lot of the movements that I do. I don't feel it anymore. They don't feel bad at all. But there was like little concepts that I came up with on my own that I just started using with clients. For example, if the shoulders start climbing up during a movement, you need to cap them. So I just tell everybody, I'm like, cap your shoulders, and they drop them down. And then just little like terms like that like it just helped me with my adjustments. So with the hypermobile, like you're essentially like everything's like floating out of place. That's what it feels like. Like no matter
Mm.
what you're doing, so you're constantly having to like readjust. Um, Also, like this was my issue with functional patterns was that they get all into the TVA and they have you activating that. I really went in on that, and I was activating my TVA so hard that it was flexing my lumbar, and so I actually ended up creating a bunch more like dysfunctional layers to work through. It's like
Mm.
there's different kinds of pressure that you can create. I just learned, so 2 months ago I was working with a client and we were talking about core activation, and I was telling her, listen, you've got like what 6 7 layers of muscle in your core. To think that like you can consciously intervene and coordinate all those muscles to work the way that they're supposed to, it's just not possible. Some of them are like helping you digest, some of them are helping you breathe. Like there's no way. So why would you be squeezing it? Why would you be consciously like trying to tell everything what to do? Because you're not going to be able to apply like that. You're not going to be able to create that tension properly no matter what. And then I worked with a girl who said when she does her squats and stuff, she doesn't actually like squeeze in, she actually pushes out. And like I had never thought about that. I had never thought about creating pressure in the opposite direction of what functional patterns taught me, which was to suck everything in. And although it may not be the end all, like I said, you can't consciously cue the core to work effectively. So, but I started pushing out when I would do certain things, and all of a sudden I'd hear like a pop, 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 and I'd feel pressure relief everywhere, and like my body would just instantly feel better. So like you're kind of always figuring out like new ways to shift the pressure in your body, because there is no like the problem is that we're consciously trying to figure all this stuff out when it should have happened intuitively and behaviorally and all that stuff. So like although like Goda is my map, like I'm always going to try different things just to expose my body to different kinds of feedback, because again with the hypermobile you get like these instant adjustments. Like I can change my body like that, but it'll change right back. So for example, I was seeing this girl who was a yoga teacher like 2 years ago, and I would take her classes every once in a while, and I would avoid probably 30-40% of the poses that they were doing, but I would get into some of them and I'd be like, this isn't right, but it feels like unreal. Like it feels like I've needed this for like 2 years. And so I know that like you're in terms of like consistency in your training, like you need to stay within the map. But every once in a while, just like when you were a kid and you would just do weird stuff and you'd be fidgeting all the time, like you wouldn't perfectly be in your columns that whole time. Like you would get exposure in other areas, and then you would come back to your columns because that was the most comfortable place for you. So it's like I don't want to get too much like up in here. I want to be down here. I want to be playing. I want to be moving. You know, I wrestle. Like, I don't wrestle in the room as much anymore just because I feel like I haven't earned it yet, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
I will know when I'm ready to start going hard again. But like, I just feel some instabilities in my neck and stuff. But I'll take my dog out and we'll wrestle in the grass. We'll play around. My body feels amazing, and you know, it's like this is what we train for. We train to be able to play and live life and do that stuff. So I try not to be like have a purist mindset, which is definitely, I've run into that a few times in interacting with functional training coaches and stuff. And, you know, it's like you just got to kind of feel it out constantly.
Yeah,
I think that
I agree. Go ahead.
yeah, the explorer's mentality, I don't think that if you have it, I don't think you can get rid of it. It'll always just be there. You'll always want to, for me, I have to tinker with everything, you know, like I still do, let's say FP style movements where I'll try to link the fascia and different tensions in the math, in the go to math, right? So I've kind of made go to the fundamental, and then I can still, you know, practice a little bit of the WEC method, you know, fun double down pulsing, to put me in different directions, or the FP, you know, playing with tensions and swinging my body around. Again, always in the go to math.
It's
It's
what Coach
interesting what
Gilly
you
calls
said.
freestyling.
Okay, interesting.
So he says, you know, after you get to a certain point where you are back chain dominant, you maintain inside ankle bone high, like explore in like free. We encourage freestyling. Just stay within the math, you know, and but yeah, that's exactly what. Yeah, that's what one of the concepts where I was like, see, these guys get what they're talking about. Like I can vibe with that a little bit more. I don't want to be stuck to this routine for the rest of my life. I want to be able to just. It's like go to, or I mean, it's like Bam doing the lotus press on Instagram. You know what I mean? It's just like you earned the right to play, so go ahead and play.
And
Yeah.
you know, even we talked a little bit about getting out of the math contextually, right? We talked about using things like kin stretch and doing some stuff from the ATG system, and some stuff that contextually, if there is an issue with your body, like you said, you're doing yoga poses and you're like, wow, this feels like my body needed this for ages. Maybe because for ages you were doing something else, and that's the antagonist sort of thing to kind of correct it, right? Like for me, I always use the example of doing a lot of weighted stretching stuff with Lucas Aaron of Range of Strength after doing so much lifting. All this, flexibility work helped decompress my system quite a bit. I wouldn't do a lot of linear stretching now because I'm trying to optimize 3D movement and trying to like really code in these patterns that go to set out. But in a problem reaction solution context, like you might have a problem that you can address quicker or contextually with something that is quote outside of the math, and that's sort of where my head's at with it.
Absolutely, yeah. For me, like I've realized that as a hypermobile person and also a high arch foot person, the weight, it's what I need, because in a sense it's like my body's always pre-cocked to move forwards. Like my arches are always lifted, you know, my body's always kind of leaning forward. And so if I put on a weight vest and I start doing like some traveling drills, it actually helps me feel my arches finally start to drop a little bit. I want that suction cup feeling where my arches kind of bounce down and come back up without my ankles collapsing. And I've never felt that with, I mean, now I'm getting to the point where I can soften and I can relax and eventually I can get there. But if I slap, you know, 20 pounds on a weight vest, it's a lot more instant. And then, like you were talking about, like loaded stretching, like I don't think I'll ever get to a point where I'll go back to static stretching. But lately, I've been loving like getting into the pigeon pose with like 20 pounds on my vest and just like fidgeting like from that position. And then I'll do pigeon rockers. And then if I've rocked, you know, forwards and backwards perfectly, like 15 reps, then I'll scoop my. I'll just show you guys real quick. And a person that I got this from actually was Coach Carly. She's an awesome page to follow if you guys don't follow her. But I'll be like right here for maybe 8-9 reps, and then I'll switch over and come here, maybe just 3 to 5 reps. So I'll come over here. I'll start kind of moving my arms around and just, I always tell people, I'm like, your spine, your central nervous system, your body is like very similar to wet cement. You stop turning it, you stop keeping everything moving, it starts to get dry and it starts to, it loses that moisture distribution. So if you just keep everything turning, you keep moving, eventually like your body is going to start to wiggle free of what Elliot Holst used to call the neurotic holding patterns, right?
Yeah.
Because that's just, we're just trying to break free of those chains. So yeah, that's been huge for me, definitely.
So you were mentioning having high arches. Now, going along with high arches and being hypermobile, is it that you have high arches and as soon as you start running, they just start collapsing onto the floor? Or like, how does that work for you? Because how do I say this? Like, if you have high arches, usually that type of person is either super rigid in their feet or they just have a good foot pattern. I look at high arches almost like an ability, like, how do I say this? Like, it's a good platform for power. But if you're hypermobile, how do you control that?
Yeah, so like I was talking to a buddy who's in the Marines, and he said they actually look for the high arch people because we can carry more weight for long distances, right? But the foot's a dome, and in a high arch foot, like I feel like it is rigid, so everything on top of it, like the foot doesn't really absorb shock well. Like it hits the ground, and then everything above it wants to just wiggle, right? And then the flat-footed person, they're the exact opposite. That foot is just like all over the place, and so it's all they really have to think about is lifting up. I have to learn to like relax and let go, so I can have a little bit of that just not flexibility, but elastic recoil. Being able to, but that what happens is my arch stays up high and then it just kind of dumps my ankle in, so the arch never really collapses, it just kind of shifts around here. And I wasn't really thinking about that until the last few months. I started posting more of like my sprints and stuff, and I was like, my upper body looks good, my hips look good, but god, my ankles and my feet just terrible. So also, I buckle broke. You know what a buckle break is?
No.
So I basically broke all 5 metatarsals in my right foot. And a buckle break is when all of them go like that, right? So my right foot arches way higher than my left. I think that actually, because that happened when I was like 5. So I did that, and then at 16, I was running bleachers, and in my right hip, my growth plate fractured. Just like, just it was like it definitely wasn't a break sort of pain, but it was like it was a pretty high level of pain. And then after that, I broke the right collarbone. I broke like everything's happened to the right side. So that right foot, like being up higher, I think it kind of shifted my pelvis a little bit. It shifted the way that leg moves, and so I was already right side dominant, so I was putting everything into that side, and then once it was destabilized, it just the injuries never really stopped, until I obviously got control of everything.
I'm just nervous to test my mic. I know I was getting some feedback there, but
Good
yeah,
now.
sorry about that. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, you're good.
I think there was like literally an electrical grounding issue, and I have to like hold my thumb on my computer now to ground my microphone. It's really, I've never had that issue before. It's really, sorry about that before, guys.
You're good.
Yeah, so we're coming up close to the 1 hour mark, and I'd love to give some people some practical stuff in terms of, if there was someone new listening to this podcast and they're thinking about how to start their own movement practice. Obviously, one of the things that you brought to light was that your situation is going to be different if you're hypermobile versus if you're not. But if someone's coming to a movement practice new, maybe they have a little bit of a background working out, maybe not. But they're saying, hey, what are the best habits to kind of get into? Where can I kind of start with movement practice? One of the things that I promised one of our listeners too is I'd asked every GOTA coach that we interviewed is, how do you get started with GOTA? What's your go-to?
Well, it's as a hypermobile person, you're struggling to learn control, and like you have to learn to limit things. And the safest and the smartest, in my opinion, way to do that is to just get to the floor, no matter what. Like I find that as goofy as it feels, like I'll work on crawling in the middle of the gym, and over the course of even just a few months of like focusing specifically on rockers and crawling, getting up to my feet and doing more complex stuff, it's like I know when I come outside of my columns now because it may be a very slight feeling, but I know when it's happening. There's like a little snag in the tissue, like I call it, you know. So get to the floor and be comfortable with crawling. Um, and if you are hypermobile, focus on the columns. Like get in your columns because you're probably constantly out of them in multiple contexts. Not just the feet being wide, but the spine being all over the place. Like Coach Ricky, he would say that the spine is a lava lamp, right? And it's just constantly oscillating. Well, I was like way out here, even when I first started doing my GOTA stuff. And so, like, I would say specificity is the best thing for hypermobile people. Like, getting the eye over the third toe and really focusing on getting into the math. Like, when you're stiff, like, you need to move, right? But when you're hypermobile, you need to slow down and learn control and just be like very um what's the word? Like you have to tackle like each individual portion of the body because everything's shifting all over the place. So control, get to the floor, focus on your columns.
So, is there something very specific that you're working on right now? Like, for me, I'll give you an example, very, very specific. So instead of coming up off my heels and just going on that fourth and fifth pivot point, I'm working off getting the inside ankle bone high off the cuboid bone and getting that specific with it, right? Is there any sort of thing that you're doing with GOTA, that you're experimenting with now that you can let us in on?
Well, actually, it's funny that you say that, like putting pressure into the cuboid, because that literally, like last couple of days, I've just been putting all my focus. The left foot, my feet are so different that when I realize that, like when I'm doing footwork on the right, I'm not even touching the cuboid. Like I'm just driving down that outside corner. And I will get like a little nerve twinge every once in a while now. And I realize like the cuboid's not, I'm not having that rotary action. But another big thing for me too has been like the gyroscopes of the spine, because I realized that like I'm still getting it wrong. Like I'm still just using my hypermobility in the front chain instead of like controlling the ribs and the hips and actually bending the T spine, right? Like I'll be like moving my hips without knowing it, and then this is my side bend is like my pelvis going like this, and so my head's like way outside the columns. Um, and then other than that, oh, my knees. My knees have just been a weird no pain. I've never ever since the growing pains, like I've never had like a major knee injury or anything like that, but they look so sloppy when I pick up speed. And I realize like I need to learn to create force. Everything's down and in with my knees. Like if I was to take an x-ray, my guess would be that my femurs like they have kind of a proclivity to go like low in the joint. So now when I'm doing like my squats or my rockers or anything like that, I'm picturing like my knees actually giving force back up towards the hip, shoving the femur up into the hip capsule, and then loading the glutes or trying to get into the lateral hamstring, lateral calf. Because if that femur is low, like you're not going to access anything the way that you want to. So create and it, I learned that from actually cueing clients. Like they're I give them 20 different cues and their spine still looks funny. So like they're doing just like a basic wall sit and they're telling me that they're feeling pressure in the front of the knees. And I'm like, all right, take your knees and shove them back up into your hips. And then it just kind of tightens everything up for them in a good way. So I was like, I probably need this myself. And I've been practicing that with putting more pressure in the cuboid. and my legs, like not just the definition, but like they're actually like they're starting to look more similar to each other. There's more symmetry now. I'm seeing that access on the right side as well as the left. But yeah, those are the main things, definitely.
It's huge. We got a guest commenting. Anya Ensor just wants to say that Jordan and Goda have both changed her life for the better. This is filmed on No Filter Net, which is a live and interactive platform. So if anyone has any questions for Jordan before we wrap up, you can type them in the comments. You can even hit the knock button if you want to join the stream yourself and join us on video and audio. And if you're listening to Spotify or iTunes, you can go to nofilter.net and view all of our upcoming shows as well. In terms of your own goals, it's really cool that like I always found too that coaching other people and having to solve other people's problems always gives you deeper insights into how you can apply things to your own practice. I think that was really for me. I haven't worked as a personal trainer in over a year now, but it's one of the things that I kind of miss the most about my own movement practice is having other people who I'm working with to solve their problems so intensely that gives me that level of insight to help myself as well. I've always found that you really understand something when you can teach it, and then you'll also up level your own understanding when you're able to apply it to other people. That's always been my experience. In terms of a daily practice or a daily like behavioral thing, what behavioral things do you see people kind of lose out on or fail to consider when they're going through their day?
Even with people that I do start teaching the concepts to, it's like they perceive like I'm only gonna work on posture and movement when I'm working on it. So like when I'm at the gym, I'm gonna do a great job. I'm gonna be pigeon-toed. I'm gonna be doing all these things, and then it all kind of falls apart once they go to work. And they give me the feedback. They're like, "Man, this week I did terrible. I sat on my couch every night." Um, and the whole concept behind go to like I was saying earlier, like you let gravity do the work, and you just keep your body in the mat. Well, that's hours and hours outside the math, and it's kind of like, you know, picking the floor over the couch. In my opinion, it is a lot easier than showing up to the gym and doing your rockers and doing all of the things that you need to be doing. Like if you just rest right, your body's going to change a pretty good amount. I mean, I see I see friends and family like lounging on the couch, and I'm the weirdo on the floor, and I'm like, guys, it's all good now, but 20, 30 years from now, like you're going to be in some serious pain, and I'm still just going to be like flopping around on the floor just playing basically. So take the opportunity to like every time you get to rest, just do it in a better context. Don't just completely give in to your front chain. Remember that even when you go home, you're still in that like fight with gravity. You're still actively trying to battle the aging process, which is what we're all doing here. So yeah, rest better, definitely.
Well, that's fantastic. I wish we had another couple hours because I know we could get in even deeper, and we'd love to have you back on the show, like 100%, because this was great.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
is
and
there
we
anything
will
else?
have you back on. There's some like wrestling specific and lifestyle
Oh,
specific.
yeah.
There's all kinds of specific stuff, but it was really cool hearing your backstory. Janet is also saying, like Anya, Jordan has really helped her in the past few months. She's 72, full of disabilities, but you've found very creative ways to help. So,
Yeah.
you got some very dedicated, happy clients who are supporting you on this live stream right now. So
Much
Jordan,
love.
if people want to know more about you and your work, what's the best place for them to find you?
You can go on my Instagram, or if you go to my website, which is trained by TOAVS, that's my last name .com. So trainedbytaves.com, that has the links to all my social media. The book will be out. I'm re-releasing the book because I had to rewrite it after the GOTA cert. It changes things for you. But it'll be up there in the next day or two, so you can kind of just learn my backstory and check out my content and get in contact with me. You know, I spend all in between clients. I'm constantly answering requests for videos and like tutorials, and I don't mind giving out, just helping people out. So if you're trying to get into this somehow, feel free to reach out. Like I'm all ears. Oh, and thank you guys, dude. This has been rad. Like, thank you for
Thank
inviting
you.
me on the show. I'm stoked to be here.
Yeah, this was awesome, and we'll definitely have you back on, man. This is like, I feel like this was just the start of a conversation. We could go for hours. To everyone who joined us live today, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us live. For those who are listening on iTunes or Spotify or Anchor, thank you for checking us out. Come check out one of the live episodes sometime. They're really, really fun and interactive. We'd love to have you be a part of it. Jordan, man, thanks again for joining. Go check him out at trainedbytaves.com. That's the last name, TOAVS. And we'll see you next time for the Art of Move podcast.
Have a good one, guys.